Okay, congratulations are in order because you are now ready for laying out your boards. And there's some basic principles of composition that you probably heard some of these before in your intro to design classes. Some of them are things like alignment, aligning, in this case, aligning drawings with each other, and particularly the edges and corners of drawings with each other. There are also real or implied borders. So borders around your drawing sometimes are rectangles or bars of color, but sometimes you just align drawings or the edges of drawings or text. Visual weight, some drawings are heavier than others. They have more poche or more hatching or more cross-hatching. They're just heavier visually than others. And often you can look at that through positive or negative value studies. Visual hierarchy. Does your drawing, is it center heavy? Is it heavy at the top or heavy at the bottom? Is there a lot of text on one side or another side, or the top or the bottom? Or is it kind of an even scatter shot? Other things that are not really principles, I suppose, but that you should always have things like keys or legends. And this may be something as simple as a graphic scale next to a scaled floor plan or elevation. Or it might be something more complicated like a legend or a graphical key. For example, you're all using various strategies of design, either universal design or aging in place or some historical context. Have a graphical key that explains what you're indicating on your plans or elevations. Finally, text and images together, you'll want to consider what that balance is going to be. Probably images are going to be more powerful than text, and by all means reduce the amount of text to the absolute minimum. And I've stolen some presentation board layout discussion here from the City University of New York. And they just had some nice diagrams where they discussed laying out a grid. And of course, there are the grids that come with our software, but you can use any sort of grid to help you lay out a drawing or a sheet of drawings. And what I liked about this is it gave two different board layouts that basically use the same grid, but kind of have apportioned the images on it differently, the images and text. Also, text in particular is a real fraught subject. You should be aware of what sort of font you're using, sans serif, which has a very modern aesthetic, or serif, which is often easier to read and is a historical kind of look, but may not be appropriate for every type of project. And in general, you probably only want to have one font, maybe two in a project. 3 is absolutely going to be 1 or 2 too many. Sometimes you'll see people will use a serif font and a non-serif, sans serif font, just for emphasis of particular elements. Finally, there are architecturally specific types of things. Plans and elevations, for example, are going to want to align with each other, and that helps you to read the three-dimensional space that you are depicting, or sections also will align with each other. And just some quick examples. Again, a graphic board layout, you can see things are aligned with each other. Even this implied alignment with these objects and this object, or these objects, the edges here align. These are all in a row. They align with the width of that large drawing. And graphically, this is clearly a very important image in the presentation. And these are not quite as intense, and they are meant to be secondary. And here's a drawing, a project where there's multiple levels. And again, you can see they've aligned these objects with each other. Even these perspective images, which are much more freeform, are sort of somewhat mirror images of each other. So anyway, all right, let's move on to how you produce these images. There are several electronic tools which are available. All of them use very similar techniques. Typically, all of these are accessed via what are called context-sensitive menus when you right-click on different things. So that is a really good reason to go get a mouse if you haven't already. Right-clicking is just easier with a mouse. Anyway, you should know how to do these basic things. Drawing order is the biggest one, moving objects forward or backward, for example, so that text sits in front of an image rather than underneath it. All objects have what are called grips. There are little pieces, little dots that you can grab onto and stretch, crop, or move different elements. You should know how to turn on a grid and force objects to snap to that grid. You should also know how to make objects snap to other objects. Now, some software will do this automatically. Some you have to tell it to. Like PowerPoint, if you just right-click in the middle of an empty slide, you can turn on these options. In InDesign, they're on already. The cursor typically will give you cues when you are aligning with things, so you'll want to pay attention to that. In particular, PowerPoint on a Mac and InDesign are very good about showing you nice graphical cues. Finally, images are typically contained within frames, so it is entirely possible to crop an image by using what's called a frame, which holds the image. You change the shape of the frame to change the cropping, or you double click inside the frame, and that allows you to move the image around within that kind of crop region. So basically, when you start a layout project, it's pretty straightforward. You want to set the page setup first before you do anything else. If you happen to be a Photoshop aficionado, make sure you set your resolution to 200 pixels per inch. Otherwise, most of these other software, you can just literally drag in images from outside, arrange them, and put in sheet graphics and titles and borders and all that good stuff. So let me jump real quickly to InDesign. And basically, when you start an InDesign project, InDesign is a printing program. So you want to go and change the preferences for the units to something that is not something printing related. Pikas are actually little tiny mice-like creatures that live in the mountains inside kind of rock burrows. We don't want to use those. We want to use inches for our dimensions. So I like to change that when I first start using InDesign. That means when I go to make a new drawing, my dimension here will be in inches, which is a little easier to remember. Typically, we do things on standard size boards. Our rolls of paper are 36 inches wide. You don't have to, and you can certainly trim that if you want a nice clean look, but I usually start with something similar to that. InDesign gives you a nice big blank sheet of paper, and if you hold down Alt or Command, I think on a Mac, you can zoom in and out when you scroll. Otherwise, when you use the scroll wheel, nothing happens. And this blank sheet of paper, the purple border is the kind of limit of what's going to print. So you don't want to have anything going past that. And one of the easiest ways to get images into InDesign is you can literally drag them in. I have a folder here, and you can do this on a Mac as well. You just drag it into InDesign, click to place it, and what InDesign will do is it will size the image based on whatever size you originally chose. Okay. Now, and if it's off the internet, you may have no idea what size. And that requires some advanced knowledge, so let's not worry about it too much. The big thing is, see these little dots? These are the grips that I mentioned. The yellow grip allows you to move the entire image in InDesign. And the other grips change what's called the frame. So if I click and drag this blue box, it makes the frame bigger. And what this allows me to do, I could, if I double click on the image, now I'm editing the image, I could change the image size independently of the frame. So watch what happens when I make this image really big. It's cropped by the frame. The frame cuts it off. And this is handy if you know the size of the printed image you want, but you don't know what the cropping is going to be. I could also grab this image here, and I'm holding down the Shift key as I drag these grips. That makes the image change size, but it keeps the proportion. Now, if I want to make the frame fit the image, I just right-click on it, and under Fitting, I can tell it fit content, fit frame to content, and you see how it stretches it. Now, if I also just want to make this whole thing smaller, if I hold down Control or Alt on a Mac, when I drag it, and I'm also going to hold down Shift at the same time with my toe, it will force the image to change shape proportionally, and it will change the frame and the internal image. So again, I've got my frame out here, which is the blue box. I've got my image. When I double click on it, that's the brown box, and the two can be modified independently, and those modifications can use things like Shift and Alt to control the proportion of the image. Okay. Now, if I want to bring in multiple images, I can actually grab several off of my folder, and when you do, you can just click to place them, and InDesign will kind of stack them up. And each of those can be modified independently. So it's kind of quick that way. You can also, I don't really want all these images, you can also use the Place button. Let me just stretch this guy down a little bit. Whoops. Stretch this guy down. It's a little bit too big. You can also use the Place tool. And what the Place tool does is it basically does what we did. File, Place. You can browse and import an image this way. Okay, so now what do? We've got all these images on the board. Well, one thing is I can make all these align with each other. Watch what happens when they get near each other. See that green line? That is telling me that these images are aligning with each other. Now the bottom of this image aligns with this one, and the edge aligns with this one. You want to do that. You want to make absolutely sure that all of your images are going to align with each other, even as I'm resizing this image. You see how I get that green line? That allows me to make this drawing much more neat and clear by using those alignment cues. I can also snap it to the edge. Or if I don't want to use the edge, I can still snap them to each other. I can even click and drag on this ruler and create my own alignment tools just by dragging them in. And now I can make objects align with my new alignment tool. Okay, whoops, except I grabbed the wrong thing. Okay, so there's a number of different ways you can align things. Now you can also draw lines, and there's a line tool, clever enough to be able to draw lines. If you hold down Shift, it forces it to be orthogonal or on certain different lines. So these are really handy just for adding in some sort of ancillary graphics. When you have drawn a line, you see how I have it selected? If I don't have it selected, I can use this select command to click on it. And I can change its width by grabbing it from the menu here. I can also change the line type. If I wanted, I could have dots. Here, we'll make them really big. And I can even change their color. I'm just going to double click on this bottom color here and make them some funky color. Okay. Now I can also draw boxes, and sometimes this is nice if you want to create a little area, a little visual weight. You see how my cursor snaps to the border of the drawing. Now these boxes, they also can have different line weights, and those lines can be different colors and line types if you want. But you can also, if you double click on this box here, that's the fill color. Okay, so you can add some fill color. That's a little bit strong. I'm going to change the opacity of that box because that's going to print really dark. Generally, things print much darker than you think they're going to. Anyway, the object, I don't want that in front of my images. I want it in back. All I have to do is right-click on it and choose Send to Back. And this is true in almost any graphic software. That's how you arrange things. So you see how you can add different graphical elements. Finally, you'll probably want to put some text in. The way you put text in is you click the text tool, clever enough, and then you click and drag a box. And you see how I'm getting all these graphical alignment cues for my text. Doesn't mean that's how big my text is going to be. It just means it's going to be where the text goes. And now I can type in my cool project. Now this seems very small to me. I can select the text, and all of the sort of standard text editing tools are available up top. So I can make it really big. I can change the font and some of the other features of the fonts. And I can even add some color background if I wanted to. Okay, but I don't think I will because that looks weird. So anyway, once these objects are created, you can move them around, and you see how I still have all these graphical alignment tools available to me. Take advantage of those, and once you have a font that is to your liking, you can use Alt or I think Command on a Mac to copy it and then change the different text. Just triple click on it and you can change it to some other thing. Okay?
Now, one thing that I haven't talked about is using objects from Adobe Illustrator, placing those objects in your InDesign file. And what's really nice about that, this is an Adobe Illustrator board that I laid out, is you can take advantage of some of the nice lines and text types that you can use in Illustrator, and you can bring those right into InDesign. Just using the place command, you can browse to find a file. And of course, there are options and other things that you can do as you import it. But basically, you don't need to do anything other than set it up in InDesign, in Illustrator. One thing, too, is that when you bring these objects in, and this is true of any object, sometimes they display a little fuzzy. This is kind of InDesign saving energy. There is a way to make everything display better, kind of at the final quality, which is under the View pull-down menu under Display Performance. You can choose Allow High Quality. And this is particularly important for Illustrator files. You don't want to be confused by their size. These are vector files, so they should be able to resize at any size you want, really. One thing to consider, too, when you're in Illustrator here, you'll probably want to set the page up to be the same size as your final InDesign file. You might say, why don't you just print it out of Illustrator? Well, it is actually easier when you have files coming from Illustrator, but also Photoshop, or just Word, batches of text that you're copying from different places. If you have varied types of file formats, it is easier to use InDesign. But anyway, in Illustrator, set things up the way you want, and in particular, make sure that you choose fonts that make sense for your sheet. If you have text that's already coming from other places, make sure they match, make sure the size makes sense, because then you're dealing with a 100% view of your project here. And any changes that you make here, for example, if I were to, scale this up so that it's a little bigger, I'll just choose scale, make it twice as big so that I have, say half-inch scale instead of quarter-inch scale. Now when I save my file and I go back to InDesign, you'll see that there's a little warning message here. Hey, it's modified. The original file has modified, so you can option click and update the file here. If you don't do anything, sooner or later InDesign will update it itself. But you can see here it's changed the link so that it is the same size. Anyway, so that's how you can use Illustrator files.
So that is basically how you lay things out in InDesign. Finally, the last thing you're going to want to do is print. And if you are working in InDesign, one of the nice things is that you should have available to you the Adobe printer which should be in here somewhere, but I don't see it. Oh, here it is. Adobe printer right there, and that will create a PDF file. And you can change the setup of that printer to be whatever you want. What I typically do, the default settings are standard view, but you can certainly do a high quality print, or press quality is going to be probably the best that you're going to get. And of course, the layout and the paper size are going to be chosen by however you've laid out the drawing. Okay. Now, then all you have to do is click print. And what it will do is it will create an image somewhere on your computer. I guess I already have that one on there. And that will be something that you can take into the print lab and have printed.